Hey guys, welcome back to another one. Today I'm going to explain why populated cities almost always vote blue, no matter who. So stick with me, but before that we're going to go over some extreme key statistics first, and let's dive into it. So we all know that Donald Trump won the 2024 presidential election. Kamala Harris won by a landslide, though, in densely populated cities and counties. Before we look at that, though, let's look at one of the most remote counties in the lower 48 states. Valley County, Montana, and the state where I live.
Wow.
This is one of the most remote counties in the United States. The results in the 2024 election, you might ask, 74% of voters in the county voted for Donald Trump, while only 22.9% of voters voted for Kamala Harris. This is unbelievably stark, of course, in contrast to densely populated cities such as Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, and even Seattle, Washington, not that far from me. In the 2024 presidential election, New York City, or Manhattan, the most densely populated county in the United States, went heavily for Kamala Harris, with a win of 81.6% of the popular vote versus 17.4% for Donald Trump. But this trend is not just in Manhattan. Other very populous and densely populated cities vote very heavily blue, for example, Chicago and Los Angeles. LA County is not quite as densely populated as Manhattan, though, and you'll start to notice the discrepancies. However, LA County is still very populated, and Kamala Harris won by 64.8% of the popular vote versus Donald Trump's 31.9%. Now let's compare that to another extremely densely populated area, San Francisco, where Kamala Harris won by 80.3% of the vote versus Donald Trump's 15.5% of the vote. An absolutely staggering difference. Finally, let's compare that to the even less densely populated, but still densely populated Seattle, Washington, and King County, which went for Kamala Harris with a staggering 73.6% of the vote and only 22.3% of the vote going for Donald Trump. So now the big question is why? To understand that, I first want you to think about Tainter's law of increasing complexity. And you're probably thinking, what the F is that? Well, this law from Dr. Joseph Tainter was discussed in his 1988 book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. And essentially speaking, as societies grow, so do their complexities in law and problems. They create more rules, bureaucracies, and laws to solve coordination problems, which can then lead to diminishing returns as each new law solves a smaller and smaller fraction of the problems. But this is required many times, however, due to conflict among people in a society. More on that in a minute. Essentially speaking, applied here, more people equals more problems, but the need for more laws. But over time, lawmaking itself can become a burden. To put this into layman's terms, the more people you have crammed in together in a densely populated area, the more laws, government, and social programs are needed to accommodate all of the people. This trend of needing more laws and regulations for accommodating more people, and thus the need for more government, tends to facilitate a more democrat or liberal mindset. Laws are the tool of society which implores a limit of human behavior to what is socially acceptable. For example, let's say you live in a giant 50-story apartment complex in your big city. There are likely ordinances or laws that will restrict you from noise output. Therefore, you're not allowed to grind on your guitar and blare loud music at 3 a.m. Doing so could create a negative social interaction for obvious reasons. However, in contrast, let's say you live in a small farmhouse out in the country. If you're out in the middle of nowhere in that small farmhouse that's sparsely populated, you can probably blare your guitar and music at 3 a.m. without any issue at all. Do you live somewhere with tons of traffic? Well, you probably have a HOV lane or carpool lane that is not allowed to be used by individuals driving themselves in their vehicle alone. Again, more laws are needed to accommodate more people in more densely populated regions. More laws, bureaucracy, and social programs, again, favor a more democratic-leaning political ideology. As more laws come into effect, a giant apparatus of rules and bureaucracies are needed to enforce these laws within a densely populated region. If you don't believe me about this trend, then consider an actual government paper that was published recently. A paper was published in February of 2024 by the National Library of Medicine, and this paper was titled Scaling Laws, Legal and Social Complexity in U.S. Localities. The paper starts with an introduction that says, "We find that legal complexity scales geometrically with jurisdiction population, with a scaling parameter of approximately 0.2 and an R2 of approximately 0.2. This estimated scaling parameter is similar to gross domestic product per capita, consistent with the interpretation of legal codes as regulating social interactions per capita in cities. And then this paper later goes on to emphasize the concept of more laws in more densely populated areas, going on to say, the physics-based theoretical model of legal scaling was motivated by the frequency of pairwise social interactions. That is, as cities become larger, population becomes more dense and more interactions and conflicts occur. This trend of more complex laws and more laws in general is further affirmed by this paper published in 2024. By looking at this following chart from this paper, this chart helps demonstrate the complexity of laws as population increases. You'll see in this chart here, more densely populated regions have more lengthy laws. So now on to the good or bad news, depending on what your thoughts are on politics. Some people maybe find this good, some people find it bad. It might be reasonable to assume that as populations increase in the United States, more laws will become necessary to facilitate the increasing population. There's going to be more complex social interactions and more densely populated regions as time goes on. That means many areas may turn blue or more democratic as time goes on. And whether or not this is a good thing depends on your perspective. But the inevitability of more laws, more bureaucracy, and more government, and potentially left-leaning politics is going to become undeniable as the decades progress. Now, it's important to note that these changes will not happen overnight, as there are exceptions to the rule that more densely populated counties always vote blue. But the general trend need not be linear to apply. Whether this is good or bad, we shall have to see, but I think the trend is going to become more and more obvious as time goes on. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this one, and as always, we'll see you on the next one. For those that like, share, and subscribe, I really appreciate you. If you haven't liked, shared, and subscribed, and you found this video insightful at all, please consider doing so. And as always, we'll see you on the next one.